Maybe don't know.
This time, next time, this time to build. 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 This time power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 188 of the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. We are only a week into 2021, and if you thought that the turning of a calendar page was going to change things, you were sorely mistaken. The attempted coup on the U.S. government just a couple of days ago at first made me angry, and now I'm feeling a little more hopeful that it opened people's eyes to the severity of the situation that this country is facing, as well as how we got here, how significant a role that the hatred and the turning of a blind eye has played in us getting to this moment. So if you were surprised by this situation, maybe spend some time thinking about how we got here and how you and I and all of us contributed. For me, this situation just strengthened my resolve that 2021 is just the first step in pushing harder toward the better world that I want to live in. And part of that is bringing you this podcast, bringing you the experiences of other people, the ideas of other people, and helping to form a more complete picture of who this community is and who we want it to be. Today's guest is someone I admire in this community. I first met Taylor Fragomeni in Bozeman, Montana, where she was the head setter and youth coach at Spire. And I really enjoyed seeing her interact with that community as well as being a leader in that community. And honestly, it's tough to do both. She does it really well. She has since left Spire and is now setting at Contact Climbing in St. George, Utah, new gym opening there. And she has started her own coaching business, Holistic Climber. And we sat down in Lander at my house while Taylor was on her way from Bozeman to St. George to talk about her experience as a female in the route setting industry, as well as the lessons that she's carried over from being a great route setter, however you say that. I go back and forth, to becoming a coach. So let's get into it.
In doing that, you're like betraying yourself, which undermines trust that you have for yourself, which is going to undermine the confidence that you have. That makes it harder to take the steps that you need to take.
Power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
I love hearing people's little secrets that or the lives they used to lead before they got all consumed by climbing. And
yeah, that's my go-to one to pull out because like no one knows that really.
Now everybody's gonna
now
know.
They'll know.
Yeah. How did you get into setting?
So I started out at the university gym. I was a pretty new climber actually still at that point. I was just there a lot. My freshman year, I lived on campus and I didn't have a car or a bike or anything, so I basically would go to class and go to the little tiny bouldering wall and hang out. And
was it the typical university gym that's like just a little horseshoe shape?
Yeah.
Weird angles. And,
yeah, it was like in a old racquetball court, so it was really tiny. Lots of like weird angles on the wall, lots of features.
yeah, so I just kind of got to know some of the setters that were there, and
then the next year when I was a sophomore at the beginning of the year, I like started route setting and a few days a week, and that was kind of the beginning of it.
Was setting something that you were like, I want to do this, or was it out of necessity because it was a university gym and there weren't good boulders or routes?
I would say it was more something that I wanted to do. I also think I got pulled into it a little bit. It was partly circumstance of like, oh, we need a female setter and you're here all the time, and
We need a female setter.
yeah.
That's a thing I don't hear very often. And again, I'm going all the way back to like the 90s when I was in commercial gyms a lot, but why did they feel like they needed a female setter? And I'm not saying I disagree. I'm just
no.
It's just a thing I don't hear very often.
I've never really asked why, I guess. I think it's important to have a more diverse setting team, and so often that's like the first place that people go is like, oh, let's just bring a girl onto the squad. And I think like part of it a lot of the time, oddly, is like height too. It's like, oh, we need someone who's shorter.
Oh, sure.
And it's like, okay, well, yeah, I don't really know. I wish I had like asked.
What was the setting team like there? I don't even think of university gyms as having setting teams, but
yeah,
again, that's me going back to the 90s when
I know,
like everybody set at the gym.
Think about it like that, because it was like, that was like 8 years ago. It was just, a handful of college dudes. Everyone was like 6 feet tall, and
oh yeah. What was that experience like? Like the first days, first months, first year, whatever, with the 6 foot tall college dude setter team?
Gosh, it was fine. I mean, it's kind of funny because I think a lot of the things that I've come to notice about being female in the industry, I maybe didn't realize were happening at first.
Yeah.
So it was kind of funny setting at the university gym because there wasn't a ton of structure to it. It was kind of like, oh, go set when you want to. Like, there wasn't loads of mentorship. And then when I started setting at the commercial gym in Bozeman, that was probably like, that stands out more in my head, I guess, because I came onto this team of like everyone was way stronger than me. Like, it was super intimidating. I was probably climbing like 5'11" and like V4 at the time.
Were you still the only female setter?
Oh
on
yeah,
the team?
and that was a similar situation. So I
know you had a couple in Bozeman at some point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I came into that team via someone that set there that had come to help set for our university comp that we had, and I don't think it was, again, not just because I was female, but he was like, oh, like, this gym really needs a female setter, and like you've got potential kind of situation. So he kind of got me in the door a little bit there. Yeah, I came onto that team, and it was just, super intimidating. I was so scared to like talk to any of the guys that worked there. It wasn't exactly like a really welcoming environment. It's funny now because like a couple of the guys that were on the team when I first came on, I still work with, and they're like some of my closest friends.
Sure. And I think those situations are like, not only does it feel awkward for you coming in and can feel unwelcome, but then the people who are already there, if they've never built the skills of like creating a team environment, it can be awkward for them, and they can feel like, oh, I don't know if I should say anything, or You know,
Yeah.
it's a weird situation for everybody when someone new gets put into the group.
Yeah.
You know,
For
so
sure.
it's interesting to think about how that can affect different people's mindset based on their situation.
Uh-huh.
You know, but I'm glad it did become a welcome environment and those people
Yeah.
became friends.
Yeah, I think it took a long time. I mean, and our team has changed a lot. And when I first came onto the team there, it wasn't like a super professional environment in the sense that like we had setting shifts where everyone came in and
Sure.
like we were getting paid per route, and I don't even know like what I was getting paid for the first couple of years that I was setting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it the intimidation? How did that begin to dissipate? Was it just becoming friends with the people? Was it becoming a better setter? Was it becoming a stronger climber? Like where did the intimidation come from, do you think? And how long did it take for it to start disappearing?
Ooh.
So I think we're all intimidated at new jobs, new things,
Oh yeah,
you know.
for sure. Gosh, that's such a hard question to answer.
It's a big question.
Yeah. I think building those personal relationships definitely helped.
Mm-hmm.
When did it start to dissipate? Maybe I would say, let's see, I've been setting for 8 years. Maybe it started to dissipate for me in the last 3 years, I would say.
Wow,
even.
really?
Well, so there's all these really like subtle things, right? Where it's not just like we're all indoctrinated into the same like kind of patriarchal
Absolutely
system.
Yeah.
So I can't even fault like any of the things that have happened necessarily to people, because it's like, yeah, it makes sense that like you would say things like that, and we all say things that are harmful or unwelcoming a lot of the time. Like I have a lot of stories of things just kind of happening and being like, well, this would literally not happen if I was male.
Can we hear some of those?
Yeah, sure.
'Cause I want to be clear, like I'm not above that myself. Like I'm
None of us
indoctrinated into
are.
the same
Yeah.
system and trying to understand that system better so that I can step outside of it more often.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's patriarchy, racism, all of the things, it's all inherent in me and in everybody else.
Yeah, for
know,
sure.
so.
And I think it's worth adding even that like being female doesn't exclude you from having
Sure.
sexist viewpoints either. Like
Absolutely.
I think really frequently as women we're conditioned to see each other as competition.
Sure.
If you're in a male dominated field, like there's this feeling that there's only one seat at the table.
Right.
And that can create kind of a weird situation too, because like we want, you know, women to be empowering other women to step into this field, but then like dealing with that conditioning is kind of weird too. I think the story I would start with, I guess, is like I went to CWA a few years ago, and you know how those things work. There's a lot of networking. You chat to a lot of people. There's always this conversation of like, oh, what do you do at your gym?
Yeah. There's a lot of white dudes.
A lot of, yeah. And I remember one night, well, this happened like throughout the whole event, but one night we were all at, I think it was the Scent Studio. It was like a whole event. Lots of people were there climbing from CWA.
I was probably there.
You might have been there.
Yeah.
And at this point, I think I had been the head setter for like a year or so at Spire. There'd be that question of like, oh, what do you do at the gym? And say, oh, like I'm the head setter. And 90% of the time, the next question was, oh, well, how big is the gym?
Really?
Yeah. And I would like, kind of just pause for a second and be like, it's bigger than the one we're standing in right now. And that wasn't like the only reaction I got. There was one guy in particular, I remember, from Alaska, I think, that was like, man, that's like so cool. It like makes me really sick to see more females like in leadership roles in the setting industry.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of weird. And that was maybe the time that I started to kind of notice. And it's not that I never like felt the like negativity that can kind of come over all these little weird statements such as that like seem so.
It kind of permeates everything, whether we want it to or not.
It seems really benign on the surface, but then it does like have this effect on you, whether you realize it or not. And I think I'm only now coming into like having the words to describe what it is. Like, I don't know if you remember, but years ago when you were at Spire for a coaching clinic, at the end after you were done with your interview with Kelsey, you asked me like, why don't you think there's more women in the setting industry? And I was like, God, that's such like a good question. Like, why aren't there? And I have thought about that moment so many times over the last few years of like, how do I answer that question? Because like we know it's not happening. And it's still not. There's still not a lot of like, it's getting better, I think. But
yeah, and I think there's this weird sort of pigeonholing that happens. I mean, we know there is with like boys play with tools and trucks and girls play with dolls, you know. That's built into our lives when we're little kids, you know. And that it sort of seems like an extension of that, like, oh, I'm a boy, I'm supposed to pick up the drill and the wrenches and, you know, put holds on the wall. That's my role here in the gym, you know. And I wonder how much of that is just sticking with us and we're having a hard time shaking it, whether it's the men or the women who are in the gyms, you know. Do the women have a hard time shaking the boys play with the tools, not me? Yeah. You know.
I'm sure. And that just reminded me, like, this is something that happened a lot for a while for some reason at the gym, but I would be like up on a ladder on the bouldering wall setting, and like some random dude would be like, oh, can I like hold your ladder for me? And I'm like, stop. Like, do not step near the ladder. You're going to make me fall off of
walk
it.
Up on the
I'm
pads.
fine. And or like, oh, do you want help carrying that ladder? And stuff like that. It's like, oh, it's such a like well-intentioned comment, but it's still just like, that's like, it never happened to any of our male setters.
Right.
And so it was kind of funny, and we just kind of joked about it for a while, but we still joke about it every once in a while.
It's so interesting. I hadn't thought about this until having this conversation, but just last week I listened to a couple of episodes of Kasha's podcast about setting, Routesetting Exposed, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And I listened to this episode that was Kasha and two other setters, and it didn't occur to me until right now that it was two women, one man, and that's such an oddity in the setting world to have that ratio of people talking, you know, and all,
or even setting.
Yeah, and all extremely knowledgeable, everybody on the same level, you know. Was just, that's a cool moment to realize, oh, I didn't even realize that this was, you know, it feels like progress in my head. Yeah. Like, oh, I didn't even realize it was biased toward women in that conversation. And that's Great.
That's cool. Yeah. I can count on like one hand the number of setting days I've had where there's been equal or more women than men there setting.
And that includes, I assume, like comps, traveling to
Oh, yeah.
things with other setter teams or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, it's so weird, and I have thought about this a lot. I think a lot of the time when those little like covertly sexist things happen, you don't want to like speak up and say anything about it, because usually
Right.
like no one's going to back you up. You're
Mhm.
going to get labeled as being overly reactive or overly emotional, and it usually isn't going to like make things better.
Mhm.
I think that is starting to shift now a little bit. But it's so weird, because I think in that sense, your option is to either like make waves and not necessarily cause conflict, but like call it to attention.
Right.
And or you can like ride the waves and be like, well, I'm just gonna not say anything and like let it roll off my back and whatever.
If it rolls off your back.
If it does. But
that's the tough thing. Like,
that's the thing, is
are
that
you just
it doesn't
holding it in
really.
and getting more
Yeah.
and more upset by it all?
Exactly. So I think making that decision to kind of just roll with it, I think I did that for just so many years.
Yeah.
But in doing that, you're like kind of betraying yourself a little bit,
Yeah.
which kind of undermines trust that you have for yourself, which is going to undermine the confidence that you
Exactly.
have. And then I think that makes it a lot harder to maybe take the steps that you need to take to be successful and be confident in what you're doing and be a professional and not have to be like just fighting to be there. And that's like an exhausting thing to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have so much privilege. Like the only thing I have going against me is that I am female.
Mm-hmm.
So I can only imagine like I deal with like level 1 bullshit, but like if I was
Right.
like a woman of color, for instance, trying to be in the setting industry, like I can't even imagine what
Right. Whole new levels
that would look
of
like.
bullshit that you have to deal with.
Yeah, like if it's a spectrum of bullshit, I'm only at the bottom of that spectrum. But I think that is honestly like a big reason that there's not more diversity in setting, is because there's so much more friction, right?
Yeah.
For
Yep.
people who aren't white males to like be in that industry.
Yeah. Have you started speaking up?
I think like, yeah, I have. In those little instances. Like I remember a couple years ago for our rope comp, one of the members of the gym who I actually used to set with years ago, he made a comment. I had like put the main dish hold. It's like a small feature on today's standards, like an e-grips feature.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it's like, it's a small feature.
Mm-hmm.
I had put it like up at the top of this route, which I set top down, so that's like, it's actually easier to put big features at the top of the wall.
Sure.
Putting them in the middle is worse. But he said to me like, "Oh, I'm impressed that you like hold that hold all the way up there." And I just kind of looked at him and I was like, "Why? Is it because of my weak little girl arms?" And he was like, "Oh, no, I wasn't saying that." And I was like, "Are you sure?"
Yeah, what
Sure
were you
that's not
saying
what were
exactly then?
So I'd like to, now I just kind of like give a look and I'm like, why?
Mm-hmm.
Why'd you say that?
Do you feel like the setting team around you or the people you're pushing back a little toward are receptive of it and trying to change their like bias?
I think so, yeah. And I think it was definitely worse when I was newer to setting, like in that first half of my experience where
Sure.
I think a lot of the time I was treated like I was only had the opportunity to be there because I was female, but
Mhm.
I'm actually like a really good setter. It's not just because they wanted to have their diverse team or whatever. And
What's kind of a double whammy in the beginning, right?
Mhm.
You're the new person and you're
Yeah.
female.
yeah,
So you're dealing with two levels of it,
yeah,
you know,
and the
whereas
weakest climber, which is like a whole other
yeah, that's a whole nother
thing.
level.
Yeah, which honestly, like in the process of forerunning and like coming up with grade consensuses and stuff like that, like the weaker climber has like should have more input, I think.
Mm.
When the 513 plus climbers are like, oh yeah, that's for sure 11, and like the 12 minus climbers like, no, like it's this grade probably, like that person's probably more accurate.
Yeah,
I think.
that's certainly true. You know, I've said for
Yeah.
years that if you want to try a route, if you want to try to flash something, don't ask the person who's climbing 3 grades higher.
Yeah, so
you
true.
know, ask the
Yeah.
person who has to struggle a little bit at that
Yeah.
grade because they're going to know it way better.
Absolutely. Yeah, and oh man, there's so many just little stories.
Well, we need all the stories,
It's-
so
A lot of these instances have not been with the setters that I've worked with for years. Like
Sure.
I've been at the same gym this whole time. It's more often going like out of that realm and people just assuming that I'm inexperienced. Like for example, we set a bouldering regionals a couple of years ago now. The USAC setter that came in to run it, I think it was his first one that he was running. But I've like coached in this region for years and I have watched all of these climbers for years. And I remember we were like forerunning the stack of female B boulders. And I know I said like multiple times, these boulders are too hard. Like, yes, we have a national champion in our region. She might top them, but like everyone else isn't going to get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I might as well just not have even been talking.
Mm.
Like it wasn't even acknowledged.
Yeah.
And sure enough, there was like at least 5 to 10 B girls that got 0 points.
Yeah.
Which is not good. That is like a bad set to just go to regionals and not get any zones at all.
Yeah. And you know, that brings up an interesting point that like shouldn't have to happen, and that's that on your setting team you've proven yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then even though you're a coach who's been seen in the region for years, you go to this other place and you haven't, air quotes here, proven yourself as a setter in that regard. You know? And you shouldn't have to. But I think the fact that you're a female in this male-dominated setting says that, okay, you have to prove yourself before we trust what you say.
Yeah, it's almost like you're held to a higher standard.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of fucked.
Yeah, and I want to preface this with like, we're not trying to bash anyone necessarily.
No,
like
not
we
at
said
all.
at the beginning, we all have these built-in
Yeah, for sure.
biases that we're dealing with, and you may be a raging fucking sexist, and if you are, you know that, and the people around you know that, and you're gonna have to deal with that on your own. But most of us are just, this is built into us, and
It totally
we're
is.
trying to learn how to escape it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I like can't even fault anyone for those little things.
I fault people all the time, so I throw fault around probably too often.
Yeah, it's funny. I think like first you have to like know to question the conditioning, and then you have to choose to question it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't choose to question it, after knowing that you should question it, then I'll fault you. But
Yeah.
but before that, I guess I give a little bit of leeway.
Yeah, and that's why I asked if your route team was like accepting of the pushback and trying to change it. I'd like to believe that we're making it more common to have these conversations and to get uncomfortable and to be vulnerable and to say, "Oh, yeah, you're right. I screwed that up."
Yeah.
You know, but I'm also stuck in my little world where I'm trying really hard to do that, and even though I'm doing it on a microphone, that doesn't mean that everyone else is trying to do the same thing. I'd love to believe that. And I hope it's happening to some degree.
I think it is. It feels like it is. And I mean, I can only provide my perspective and my experience, I guess. And there's so much variation, I think, between setting teams and across the industry as a whole. Yeah, but I do have like a lot of hope and faith that it is like improving. At least that's what I've seen. And maybe part of it is just that I like don't care as much now if people like have an issue with me speaking up about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm kind of like, well, you know, that's your problem.
Have you ever set in any of the environments that are mostly female setters, like the she sets and
no, I
events
haven't.
like that?
No, not at all. I'd love to. I think it'd be really cool.
Yeah.
It's awesome that stuff is happening now. Just in the last few years, right? That those have started.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And you're moving to a new gym.
Yeah.
That will have another female on the setting team, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I've already had some really awesome conversations with the head setter there, and it sounds like it's going to be like a really welcoming, like inclusive environment, which I'm really excited about. Not that like the team I'm on right now isn't, because it is.
Sure.
But when I first came into it, it was definitely like a boys' club.
Yeah. I think all setting was a boys' club.
Yeah.
At some point, you know, and it's gradually
for sure
been changing.
Yeah, and I can remember even like there were lots of, you know, like inappropriate jokes that were made.
Sure.
And like just what I guess you would characterize as like locker room talk.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've seen some women. This is something else I find interesting that you were talking about, like having to sort of let it roll off your back. I know a lot of women who engage in the locker room talk almost as a way to assimilate.
Yeah, totally.
And to fit in. And then I can see that it affects them. Mm-hmm. Like maybe when the guys who are doing the locker room talk aren't noticing that this is affecting this person negatively, even though they're engaging in it.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen that quite a few times, and it, as somebody who chooses to be outspoken and push back often, I always have to kind of check myself and say, not everybody is willing to engage in conflict as often as I am. Yeah. You know? And I understand that to some degree, but I have to check myself because I'm like, well, if this is bothering this person, why don't they just, you know, put it in that dude's face? That.
Yeah, I think it's like there's this element of exhaustion, right? Where it's like, oh, if you had to call out like everything that happens that makes you uncomfortable.
Fuck, that's a really good point.
That's exhausting.
I have the choice to engage in the conflict.
I think it.
Like I step in of my own accord. It's not brought to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I think for it to really change, like what needs to happen, what I would love to see happen is to have like these sexist instances happen and have like one of the male setters say something before like the female setter even like thinks about it.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
that would be like way better. Yeah, it's a lot to have to like. I a lot of the time will just choose to not say anything because I'm like, oh, I just don't feel like I want to exert the emotional energy to deal with this right now, and especially if it's someone that you're like not sure how they're gonna react, which is going to be the case if you're setting with a team that you don't normally set with, and you're like, is this like a safe place for me to call out that this thing is happening, or is it just going to like make things worse?
Right. Right. And I can walk around the world, especially in climbing gyms, and I'm like, this is a safe space for me to say whatever I want.
Yeah.
You know, it's rare that I think, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that right now. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I have carte blanche. I can just say whatever the fuck I want to say now.
Yeah.
And you have to be picky about it.
Yeah. And I think now, like I said earlier, for me, letting a lot of it go, I wasn't really letting it go. Like, it did definitely become this issue of me starting to not, like, trust myself because I just so frequently was like, oh, I'll just, like, pretend like this is fine.
Yeah.
And I've just gotten tired of doing that, I guess. I don't want to be at this point in my career and be like questioning if I deserve to be there or like have enough experience or I'm good at my job. And I think for me at least, choosing that path of being like, oh, I'm just going to ignore this and like let it be was causing me to feel that way. And it still does sometimes. That's something that I'll probably have to like work on forever. But
sure. Yeah, I mean, it's going to affect not just your job and not just how you feel in the setting environment, but it's going to affect your relationship with climbing. Mm-hmm, you know, sure. It's pretty common, I think, for people to really fall in love with climbing because it's this escape. It's this like time when you feel really independent. You know, everything is up to you. Mm-hmm. You know, you make the mistakes, you have the successes.
Yeah.
You know, and it's all you. And that's a really empowering feeling. But then to start letting those things in, and it almost ruins that empowerment for you. Mm-hmm. And people end up with this bad relationship with climbing.
Yeah. And I've definitely gone through periods of climbing where I'm like, oh, this is just like, what am I doing? I'm not having fun.
Yeah.
And I don't want to feel that way.
Are you having fun now?
I am, yeah. Like learning to like speak up and use my voice and like be a little bit more confident has definitely impacted my climbing in like an extremely positive way.
Yeah.
And
plus you went bouldering yesterday and that's way more fun than sport climbing. So
I don't know. It was pretty fun. I'm learning to enjoy it and embrace it. Yeah, that was a good time. Yeah, I think things are definitely looking up, I think. I'm trying to remain hopeful and not just be like, ugh, everything's just so messed up. Why has all this stuff happened? Which I think is like a really natural response to have when you start to become more aware of all of these injustices that exist, whether they're like daily little comments or like huge things.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to feel that way. But I don't know, I have hope. I'm like so inspired by how much like I see people using their voices now and the authenticity and like vulnerability that I'm seeing. And that has definitely contributed to like me being able to use my voice as well.
Yeah. You know, I've been working on music recently with my friend Devin Dabney, and one of the lines I wrote in this first song that we're releasing, part of the line just says, went from hope to fear. And I was originally referencing just the campaign messages between, the disparity between Obama to Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Like Obama's whole campaign was based on hope,
Mm-hmm.
and Trump's whole campaign is based on fear, But it also occurred to me that that's the feeling we've all gotten. We went from being super hopeful to being very fearful.
Mm-hmm.
And starting to act. More people are taking action because of that fear, which in turn gives me hope.
Yeah.
And I think this community is no different. Like we've seen it have some major moments in the last few years, whether it's coming to grips with the fact that, yes, you spraying beta at that woman climbing is you being sexist, and coming to grips with the fact that we all have racist tendencies, and that scared us all initially.
Yeah.
Like, oh, am I allowed to even talk to women in the gym anymore? And now we're starting to take action because of that fear, and that's leading to at least me, and I think you and a lot of other people feeling more hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think without that hope too, it's kind of necessary, at least for me, to like hold on to that and be like, okay, like things are going to feel like they're getting worse for a while, but then they're going to probably get better. And I really value vulnerability and authenticity, and I think those things are so important, and I like seeing that more.
Yeah, me too. And I value it in everything I do.
Same, yeah.
If something feels fake to me, I just push it aside. Whether that's a good trait or a bad trait, I don't know, but being really authentic. And this is an interesting idea that we may just get stumped. This may end the podcast right here because we're both just like, I don't know what to say now. But there's now that vulnerability is something that people are leaning into, there's also an element of fake vulnerability out there that I think is dangerous. I know we're going off the rails here, but I'm seeing that more and more, like using vulnerability as a marketing tool or as a way to get attention in a world where being vulnerable is really important.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's important and also trendy now.
Yeah.
I've thought about that a lot too recently, actually, of like, is this for real? And it's so weird because it's like you don't want to be in the position of like questioning people's vulnerability.
Exactly. And you don't want to not put your own out there because you're worried about being trendy.
Yeah. And I've definitely thought about that a lot. Like with starting my own coaching business, and I've battled a lot with this thought of like, how much of like myself do I want to put out there as part of like what my business is, like of my personal experiences. And
sure.
And I was like, oh, I don't really want it to be about me. I don't want it to seem like I'm just sharing this stuff just to like get likes or whatever. And that's part of what has like slowed me down in starting the whole thing and trying to decide what I want it to look like. But I kind of just spent a lot of time sitting with it and being like, well, if it was just me and like I wasn't worried about how it's going to look or any of that, what feels like the most authentic thing to myself to do.
Yeah.
And that that like authenticity and vulnerability is, I think, really important for me, and that I like being able to like write out my thoughts and feelings on things and share it. And I think there's a lot of power in sharing experiences and then having people absorb them and be like, oh, cool, like I'm not alone in this.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's the biggest reason to share that stuff, to make art that shares that, whether that's writing, music, painting, visual art, whatever it is. That's the biggest reason, is so that people know they're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah, and in that too, like, and even in sharing that and then hearing like, oh, thank you for sharing this, like, it makes me not feel as alone. Like, that's healing in a way too. Like, okay, like I'm also not alone in this.
Totally.
Because none of us are, really, even though it feels like it.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I think it's really cool that you're leaning into that as a coach right at the beginning, because there's definitely this like preconceived notion in people's mind that if you're a coach, you're supposed to have it all figured out already. And there shouldn't be any vulnerability. There shouldn't be any like questioning. There shouldn't be any mixed feelings. You should just know it all. You should have it figured out, And that's not a fucking real thing.
No.
It doesn't exist.
That is like dangerous to operate under that.
Yeah, if you're acting like you have it all figured out, then you've probably got more unresolved issues than the people who are being open about, maybe I don't have this totally figured out.
Yeah, I think like the more coaching experience I get, the more I'm like, I don't know the answers. Like, I'll ask some questions and we can figure it out. But yeah, man, it's none of us have anything really fully figured out, I don't think.
No way. No way. The only thing I have totally figured out is that I know I don't have it all figured out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there are days where I'm like, oh, I got this shit figured out.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't even have that completely figured out. Yeah, it's what spurred on the starting your own coaching business. You've been coaching kids for a lot of years.
Yeah. I think there were a lot of factors. One being that I've been in the climbing industry now for 8-ish years. I've been instructing and coaching for a lot of that time. I wanted to kind of see what else I could do with it. After, I think it's been the last 4 years that I've been coaching pretty heavily on the youth circuit, it was starting to feel, I don't want to say repetitive, because I feel like I can like get better at it every year for sure. But it's just not as close to like who I am as a climber in a lot of ways. Like, yeah, sure. I didn't grow up climbing. I wasn't ever like a competitive youth athlete. At least not in climbing. I did ski race and stuff. But I, at heart, am just in love with rock climbing, and I think it would be really cool to try to apply my skills to that as well. It's just different coaching adults as well, I think. Like, there are new challenges, which is awesome. I like new challenges.
Yeah, they don't fucking listen.
Yeah, I know. I think that's like, like kids just inherently trust you because you're an adult.
Yeah.
Which makes it a lot easier, I think, in a lot of ways. Like, they're probably just going to listen to you. And just different life circumstances too, right? Like, they just go to school, they do their sports, they do their other things, but yeah, I think there's different challenges to coaching adults, especially I think a big one too is like openness and like mindset stuff even, because I think adults are a lot more stuck in their ways. Like that's not to say that youth athletes don't have their hangups, because they 100% do.
Yeah.
But they have an easier time, I think, like working on them and changing them.
Their habits and things like that are a little more malleable still.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I really have to hammer at some adults, to get anything to change.
Yeah.
I try to hammer in a nice way for all of you out there who've been hammered on.
Yeah. So I think seeking out new challenges was a big part of it. Another part was just, I started working in the climbing industry a year or so after I started climbing. And so I was in college for like 4 years of that. And then I started working full time at the gym. And I have never really paused to like really invest in my own climbing and see what I can do with it. And that feels important to me as well. So part of the motivation as well was like, how can I create something where I have a little bit more freedom to travel or just, manage my own time more. Yeah. Because with coaching on the youth circuit, like the season is insanely long. Like it's
kind of all year.
Yeah, it's pretty much all year. Like you start training in September, and then if you have kids going to sport nationals, which we did, then you're not done until the middle of July.
Right.
And so at that point you're like, cool, I can like take a few weeks off in August. And then it's like, well, there's like a lot of places I'd like to go that you can't climb out in August.
Can't go in August, yeah, totally.
And it just started to feel like a little hamster wheelie. And like I
totally just had a vision of a hamster on a motorcycle doing a wheelie.
Yeah, that's totally what I was saying.
Sorry, continue.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I don't know. I think it just started to feel like time to change it up a little bit. Yeah. And I've been in Bozeman my entire adult life, and I love it there. I love the community there. I have like so many close friends there that I just don't want to leave. But at the same time, it's starting to feel like I don't have as much room to grow there, I guess.
Sure.
So.
And you're moving from a head setter position and coaching the youth team. You've gradually moved into your own business. Now you're moving into you're no longer the head setter.
No, and I was in the head coach position as well.
Right.
For several years, the last 3 or 4 years.
So scaling some of that back
Yeah, this year I kind of stepped back. And my friend Nick, who is one of the guys that I've been setting with forever, like we've known each other for 8 years, is in both the head setter and the head coach position now. So he's kind of taking things over. And yeah, now I'm stepping back. I'll be working at a gym route setting, but just part-time, just so that I have like some steady income and can build some new connections and stuff. And yeah, scaling it back.
Yeah. Yeah. And, shout out Contact who, do you know when they open?
They're projecting like early January.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. New gym in St. George. Both owners, both friends of mine, and I'm really excited that they're getting this thing going, especially in the climate that exists today. I was a little scared for them when the lockdowns all started, and it was like, oh, the future of the booming climbing gym industry is now up in the air.
Yeah.
I'm really glad it's getting off the ground, and that I'm glad they have you down there too. And I'm glad for you that you're going to be in a town where there's lots of climbing.
Yeah, so much.
Within 2 hours, you've got an endless number of
Yeah, like
routes
I
and
will never run out of things.
and
to
the more
climb
fun side of climbing boulders. There's lots of those too.
Yeah.
So, but I'm glad you're going to get to spend more time on your own climbing, just as much as I'm glad you're going to be really throwing your hat into this coaching ring.
Yeah, it's so scary, but I'm excited to like take that step. I think it'll be cool.
Yeah. What's the business name?
It's called Holistic Climber.
Why that name?
So this is something that I've like is definitely part of my coaching style, but I think it's so important to take both a broad view and a detail-oriented view to climbing and climbing training. And I've employed that with my youth athletes for a long time, and it just means like having those conversations about what's going on in your head, about the conversations you're having with yourself, about what you're eating, if you're sleeping well, what other parts of your life are like contributing to how you interact with climbing. And I think we're seeing more and more coaches taking that approach now, which is so awesome. But
yeah, and I think we have to coach from, at least initially, we have to coach from a place of experience, like things that we've dealt with ourselves. I think your experience can broaden over time, and you can come from all sorts of different angles. But so many climbers do deal with those things as the limiting factors.
Yeah.
That it just makes sense that coaching would go more that direction.
Yeah.
When I started Power Company, it was training plans were hard to come by. Like it was hard to take all of the information that was out there and use it to create your own training plan. So that's what I was figuring out how to do. And now training plans are easy to come by.
Yeah.
So having a coach who pays a little more attention to those intangibles is more and more important.
Yeah, it's like pulling all the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah.
I like that analogy just because I love puzzles, but
Well, sounds like there's an alternative logo in the future here.
yeah, there may be
some puzzle pieces.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited about it.
Are there lessons from your route setting days, be it like teamwork of setting or controlling movement in a specific way, or watching movement being broken, or coaching youth athletes? What lessons that you got from setting and coaching the youth team are you bringing into your coaching business now? I want to know, because I want to be able to use those things too. So explain in detail.
Totally. Okay. I have a few here. So, one is definitely like developing someone's style while also teaching them other ways of doing things without like suppressing their style. So, I think it was last year we hosted rope regionals, and Jonathan Brandt came and was running that comp, and I didn't set for that comp because my shoulder was all messed up, but he at the beginning said like to all of our setters, like, just don't feel like you have to do anything crazy, like set your style, because your style is unique even if you don't think that it is.
Yep.
Which I thought was, it's like such a simple thing, and I was like, oh yeah, that's like so true. So I think something that you see happening in forerunning occasionally is that maybe you'll have someone put a sequence up on the wall, and occasionally another setter will come in and be like, oh, what if you like did this instead? like essentially kind of like steamrolling whatever the other setter was trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think it's important instead to say like, okay, how can we like make this work and develop this idea that you have, and the parallel in coaching being like not trying to change people's styles. Like we all have different climbing styles.
Yeah.
Even if like you're a naturally static climber and you are working to be more dynamic or whatever. I think it's really important as a coach to help people grow into their styles while also helping them diversify a little bit. Just helping them kind of grow into like who they are as athletes as well, and not being like, oh, you're like doing it wrong, let me change that for you.
Yeah, I agree completely. You know, this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately, not just in climbing, but in all sorts of things. Like I'm a hip hop, mega hip hop fan, you know, as big a hip hop fan as you can be, I think. And but specifically of like the 90s, I really love 90s hip hop. And back then, everybody was different. Like Wu-Tang didn't sound like Tribe, didn't sound like NWA. You know, there were so many different styles, and now it's all a little more homogenized. Like everybody sounds like everybody, you know. And climbing has sort of gone a similar direction, I think, for a lot of reasons. But it used to be that like Chris Sharma didn't climb like Fred Nicole, didn't climb like Dave Graham.
Yeah.
You know, radically different styles. Now you look at climbers, and for whatever reason, most everybody at the top levels moves in a similar way. You know, they're like the Kairakandis who have this really unique style, and that's who we gravitate toward watching.
Yeah.
You know, and even moves that are like, oh, that's not a Kyra move. I'm air quoting again. I air quote all the damn time on a podcast. I need to.
No one can see it.
I need to put these on YouTube as videos or something because I'm air quoting all the damn time. But like, that's not a Kyra Kandi move. Well, Kyra does the move anyway, you know?
Yeah.
So I think being able to develop your own style is cool. We put a lot of emphasis
really cool.
and we spend a lot of time saying, oh, let's shore up your weaknesses. But let's also play to your strengths. Let's also make those your fucking superpowers.
Yeah.
You know? Have the Kyra Kandi's got a fucking superpower. Period. You know? And she's also really fucking good at all the other things.
Yeah.
So that's the direction I think we should be trying to go. Like, use your superpower.
Yeah.
I want to
like
toe hook
enhancing
every
the
goddamn
style.
time I can, you know?
Yeah.
Because I know I'm good at it. And if I can avoid the fucking heel hooks, I'm going to avoid them like the plague. But I'm also learning to do them, you know?
Yeah.
So I like that. I think that's something that gets missed. I missed it for years.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's try to be all the climbers at once instead of, oh, you climb a little like Chris Sharma. Let's see where that goes. Let's lean into that, you know?
Yeah, in the past we've done drills with the team kids where we like pair them up purposefully with climbers that are very different from one another. And then they do like this copycat drill essentially where the first person climbs it and then the other person has to climb it exactly the same way. Just to kind of get them thinking outside of the box a little bit. And I remember years ago having conversations with the kids of like, oh, well, I just don't climb that way. Like, that's not my style. And it's like, I'm not trying to change your style. It's good to like have all of the tools and then like, yeah, keep using your tools. Like still to this day, I have lots of conversations of like, okay, let's like learn to put your pinky on the hold. And
no, don't teach them that.
I know, I need like that. Because the little kids are always just like sloth gripping everything.
Yep.
And I'm like, that is fine. And we'll say like on competition day, you can do whatever you need to do to get to the top of the boulder. But at practice, let's like get out of the comfort zone a little bit
Mm-hmm.
And these things end up coming into your style a little bit. And
They totally do.
they
Yeah.
enhance it, I think.
Mhm.
Like, I used to be such a static climber, and I think this is like gonna get off on a tangent a little bit, but I
saw you jump. I saw you
I know.
dangle yesterday.
I worked on it.
You did some dangle
I
moves.
jumped and dangled. When I first started climbing, I think, and this is backtracking too, to like, I think I struggled mentally with a lot of things that I didn't realize I was struggling with, but
Yeah.
my personality was like much more control based. Like,
Sure.
I still have perfectionist tendencies, but I've like worked to kind of quell them a little bit.
Yep.
And so my climbing kind of reflected that, in the sense that I was like, I always wanted all the movements to be in control and perfect, and like I didn't know how to fight to get up the wall and stuff like that. And as I started to kind of explore a little bit more my mental landscape and kind of work into this, like, oh, maybe like it's okay to let go of a little bit of control. Maybe it's okay for things not to be perfect. My climbing kind of followed that, and I learned to become more dynamic. And like, part of it too was just like, well, I want to like keep progressing, and you can't static everything.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
not efficient to static everything.
Yeah, and I think that's an important note to make, that like, just because this used to be your style doesn't mean it always has to be your style.
Yeah, it can evolve.
You know?
Yeah.
My style used to be the same as yours. And maybe that comes from like at a young age, leaving home, you know, being on my own at 16 and having to control everything. You know, everything had to be in control, or I was going to spiral completely out of control.
Yeah.
And my climbing style reflected that for years. You know, I refused to do things out of control. I would go way out of my way to find a way to keep my feet on for that move, you know? And now I'm just like, oh yeah, let the feet go over wherever the fuck they want to go.
Yeah.
You know, if they're going to swing around, they're going to swing around. And I love it. I've really grown to love the like powerful, jumpy, you know, less controlled style. I still have,
me too.
There's still a lot of control in it, you know, maybe too much. I have a hard time releasing it entirely. But I'm learning, and my style looks completely different now than it did 15 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I think it's easy to simplify it into like static and dynamic. But even as my style has evolved, it's, in a lot of ways, it's still the same style of like, I'm a very technically adept climber. I'm not very physically strong. I still like default to complexer movements. More complex. Complexer. Not a word.
It is now.
I'm like way better.
Is it with an ER or an OR? Does complexer have an ER or an OR?
I feel like it's an OR.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah.
That's the word I saw in my head when you said. I see words. I see how words are spelled when they're said. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And that's screwed me a lot of times. like the word facade.
Yeah.
Multiple times I've said it facade because I see it spelled in my head, and then I say it that way.
Facade.
Anyway, OR. I think you're right. Complexer.
Complexer. New word for you.
Yeah.
And yeah, in that way, like my style hasn't changed because I excel much more on technical terrain, whether that means being static or dynamic. And so, yeah, it's been like an enhancement of style instead of like changing it. And I think it was hard for me to let go of that at first, of like, because of those control-based perfectionism tendencies of like, I can't like change my style.
Yeah.
And
I think it's empowering for your clients to lean into their styles. You know, people need those wins. I definitely just recently had a a situation with a client. I say situation like it's some big negative thing, but it's not at all. We just had a conversation about she wasn't experiencing the wins she needed to. And she was totally right. I had led her down this road of we'd spent a lot of time working on the things that she was bad at. And she'd improved dramatically at those things, but we weren't giving her the wins she needed.
Yeah.
So we've shifted gears because of that conversation, you know. I think it's important to have those.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the wins, they help build confidence. And I think like everything in life is a balance, and we need those wins to keep motivated and stay psyched and be confident, just as much as we need to like have the failures and the challenges to grow from and learn from. So.
Totally. What other lessons? This is good. This is practically a board meeting. So let's just keep doing it.
I know. Where's Nate? We gotta get him in here.
I can't even do the Nate deep voice, so I'm not. I was gonna try it for a second, and I'm like,
sarcastic
let's
humor.
not try that.
I can't do it. I appreciate it though.
Me too.
Okay, the next one I had was like being able to walk away and taking pride in that. So I like still to this day will have days where I'm setting and I'm just like, God, this is just not working. And you can either kind of bang your head against the wall on it and spend like an hour and a half setting one boulder problem, or you can just be like, you know what, this isn't working.
And then you end up having to tear it down anyway.
And start over. Yeah. And being able to like just say it's not working and take it down and start over without it being some huge ego hit, I think is really important. And the coaching parallel is like being able to say, I don't know, which we kind of touched on earlier, but you know, being able to say like, I'm not sure, like, let me think about this a little bit more and we can revisit this conversation. I think that's really important, because like we were saying earlier, like no one has all the answers. But also if you kind of like don't have all the answers and then you just keep going down the conversation anyway, there's, I think, a lot of potential to say something that's potentially harmful. And like I'm sure I've said things, like especially in my early days of coaching, that were problematic.
I think we all have.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think being able to take a step back and say, you know, I don't feel like prepared to have this conversation right now is really important. Yeah, I agree. And like I said before, that's a tough thing to be able to do. You know, as a coach, you're looked at to have the answers. And sometimes the answer is, I don't know. Yeah. You know, let's explore it together. Let's struggle through it together. Exactly. I'm with you. I've got your back, but I don't know the answer. You know, I think that's a very underutilized aspect of coaching. Yeah. Because we're supposed to know. It happens like weekly probably that one of the kids will come up to me and ask me a question. And I'm like, well, let me ask you this. And I'll like pose a question back to them and they'll be like, huh. And then they'll like go think about it. I'll think about it and we'll like revisit the conversation later. It ends up being like a much more valuable experience, I think, than just handing over some answer that is maybe not even right. You know, just recently I had a moment with one of my clients where it was Monday morning or Sunday night, and I was writing his plan for the next week, and I had a rough week, and 3/4 of the way through, it was very directly linked to I've been setting for an hour and a half and it's just not working. I'm gonna have to tear this thing down. Finally, I just messaged him and was like, look,
I've got the bones of your plan up, but I'm probably going to change it entirely in a couple days because right now I'm just not in the right headspace to write this. And you deserve something better. So go ahead and look at it, but it's probably going to be different.
Yeah.
You know? And it's kind of empowering to be able to say that. Like, yeah, I feel like I do a great job, but today I'm not. Today I'm fucking it up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wait until I'm doing a better job again to write your plan. Even if it's a few days late, it's going to be better than if I just hand you this thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think it's so important to be able to do that and say that and be like, you know what? And taking, like, I don't know. I don't trust people that, like, are just 100% confident in everything that they're saying all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. If there's like immediate answers with what appears to be total confidence all the time, I'm like, this person's got a template or a book or something.
Or a tactic.
Yeah. That they're just making this shit sound true.
Yeah.
And it may not be.
Yeah.
Nothing is this fucking cut and dry.
No, never. It's never that simple.
And
There's
climbing's
a lot of
fucking
layers.
complicated.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's complicated physically. The movement is the most complicated sport on the fucking planet, you know, climbing and skateboarding maybe. And somebody's going to push back on that. I'm going to get emails like, well, you forgot about this.
Gymnastics.
You know, I was a gymnastics coach. That shit is simple.
All right. Never mind.
That's simple in comparison.
I'm going to stop using that comparison now.
But it's complicated physically. It's complicated mentally, emotionally, tactically. It's so complexer. So complexer.
So complexer.
that there's no way we have all the answers.
No. Never. And the answers are different for everyone as well. Which I think leads into the next one that I had.
All right, let's do it. Board meeting.
More or less, board meeting. That there's never one answer, and sometimes the simplest answer is the best one. So the route setting piece for this is like making, in a commercial setting, you want most of the routes to be accessible to most of the climbers. So creating opportunities for someone who is 6 feet tall to climb the route and someone who is less than 5 feet tall. Whether that means like adding a bump hold, adding foot options, putting a foot on that a kid could just grab and match and like do some different sequence.
Instead of making it complexer.
Yeah, instead of like trying to force things. Like I think we talk a lot about forcing movement in route setting, but I like to use the word encourage more. Like I'm going to encourage this movement, and if there's another way around it, that's fine, as long as it's not, you know, several grades easier than what you're trying to set. That's like I'm usually not upset if there's like a second sequence on the route.
Yeah. And I think it's a cool moment when there is.
Yeah, it is cool.
Like if I spend an hour crafting a problem in the machine shop, like connecting holds together, trying to force, you know, to use that word, air quotes again, a specific move, and then someone comes in and just totally bypasses it. For me, I'm like, oh, I didn't see that. Why didn't I see that?
Yeah.
You know? So I think it's just cool.
It is really cool. And it's been really awesome over the years to watch some of our like tiny younger kids climb on boulders in the gym, and like they find ways to get up like the V7s that have big moves on them, and they're just creative, and they're doing like moves that are several V grades harder for sure.
Yeah.
But it's so cool to like have that opportunity, and it's really rare that they come into a situation on a boulder where there's just literally like no way they can do it. Well, it's maybe not that rare, but it's like most of the time they find a way.
Yeah, totally. And I think,
it's
in
cool to
this
have that.
in this coaching and training world, it's so easy to make a complex training program
Mm-hmm.
that looks effective, whatever the fuck that means.
Mm-hmm.
That it has all these moving parts and you need all this new equipment and you should get some force plates and you should,
Yeah.
you have to have all these things and it's super complicated, but that doesn't mean it works.
Yeah.
It just looks complicated.
And it's harder to adhere to, honestly.
So much harder.
Like, that is overwhelming to have a plan handed to you that has all of these moving parts and all of these different exercises. And,
Yeah.
like, when in reality, a lot of the time you can pick, like, 3 things to do. And it's
Mhm.
going to be easier to stick to, which is so important since, like, if you can't be consistent with it, it doesn't matter what the plan says.
Yeah, I go back to, this is maybe a stretch of an analogy, but I listened to this interview with George Lucas once about Star Wars,
Mm-hmm.
and he was being questioned on the idea that in the first Star Wars movie that we saw, everything was really simple. All the clothing was simple. The buildings were simple.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was super simple. But then when the actual first 3 films came out, the prequels to what we saw in the 70s, when those came out, everything was really ornate and complicated. And people were like, well, that doesn't make sense. Things went from ornate to simple.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, that's what evolution looks like.
Ooh.
Like, look back in time, things were really ornate. Buildings were really ornate.
Yeah.
Clothing was really ornate. Now we've simplified it.
Mm-hmm.
We've made it more efficient and more effective.
Yeah.
And that's what Star Wars reflects. And that's how training plans look a lot of the time for me. If I have a new client who is expecting something complex, I'll make it look complex. And then down the road, once they trust me a little more, I can be like, this 4 weeks, we're just focusing on this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's just do this for a while.
Yeah.
And that's how my training looks too. Mine right now is so ridiculously simple that I hesitate to put it on the internet because people are going to be like, that's not enough.
You're not doing it right. Yeah, I think, it doesn't need to be complicated. It shouldn't
Complexer.
be a lot of the time. Yeah, complexer.
You're just going to have to use that word forever now because I'm going to.
All right, cool.
Complexer. It sounds like a type of climbing. Like we've got technical climbing, compression climbing, and then complexer climbing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's technical compression.
Yes. I like it.
All right, I'm derailing us. You got more board meeting items over there?
I got more. I got a few more.
Talk to me.
Okay. Building things to be easily tweaked and having a backup plan. So this maybe can apply more in the youth team coaching scenario, in the sense that sometimes we'll plan workouts and all hell will break loose and we're like, never mind, this isn't working, we're going to change it.
Yep.
But in the sense of a training plan, that could go the same way as oh, we wrote this plan under these circumstances, and then maybe this life event happens and you're like, oh, I don't have time to invest as much as I thought. How can we change it to make it work a little bit better? Or, oh, I just injured my finger. What tweaks can we make? So always having kind of a backup plan.
Which is a regular occurrence.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
I would say 90% of the plans we write, we have to change to some degree for whatever reason.
Yeah. And in the sense of youth coaching and working with a team, that happens even on the scale of okay, we designed this workout and now how can we quickly tweak it to best suit each individual athlete as well, so that it's not scaled to just one type of athlete.
Right.
The setting parallel, I guess, here would be, setting something in a way that is tweakable and having a backup plan in the sense of like, okay, this is the sequence I'm trying to set, but if it doesn't work, then I can make this change, and then it should be okay.
Yeah.
And it's so good to think about that stuff ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
otherwise
just be able
you
to think on your feet.
scrap it all and start over.
Yeah.
And that takes a
Like, oh no,
crazy
you
amount of
change
time
this
and effort.
entire sequence, and then you move the handholds, and then you can use those as feet, and then it changes the sequence above it, and then you're just like, oh god, it gets out of control really fast.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a good thing. Like sometimes
Yeah.
creating a whole new animal is great.
Yeah, sometimes it is. It's not,
But it's not the most efficient way to work. Right.
Sometimes it's necessary, but it's usually not what you're going for.
Yeah.
That's like the like thing that they teach you in the level 1 clinic is like, first you turn the hold if it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
Then you move the hold, then you change the hold.
Yep.
And then like changing the sequence isn't even on that little list. So
Right.
that's like down the line pretty far.
Right. How do you get to the vision you had originally?
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
there's always room to go for another vision,
Yeah.
but how can we get to this one that you wanted?
Yeah. And that's how you learn to be a better route setter. And like coaching, it's the same way. Like,
Yeah.
okay, how can we adapt this situation to best fit this athlete in a way that's going to like provide them success?
Yeah, totally.
Or the opportunity for success at least. Yeah. I had one more.
Do it. I'm over here taking notes, so
Okay.
I'm just waiting for you. You're the leader of this now. You're the host.
Last one. All right, I'm the host now. That it's not about you and not taking things personally. So I think this one is something that people struggle with a lot in route setting, especially. You know, it is such a creative process, and it can be hard to let go and be like, okay, this is like a product for the gym. It's often hard for people to kind of part with their vision sometimes when something's not working. And like I was saying earlier, like I think it's important to encourage things and not force things. And that goes for whole ideas and not even just like specific movements. If like something's not working that you set. And remembering that like you're setting for other people. So
yeah,
you're setting for the gym members, you're setting for the team kids, whether that's the kid that is new and climbing V1 or the kid that like smashes V8 and is 4 feet tall, you know? And being able to really put yourself like in the shoes of each of those climbers as well. And then with the coaching parallel being like keeping the athlete's interests at heart and at the forefront of it and not making it about what you think the solution needs to be.
Yeah.
And just being able to hold space for athletes' emotions without like taking them on or taking them personally.
Yeah.
I think is a really big one. And that's something that I've thought about a lot in the situation of competition coaching, because you know, you're in ISO with the kids and like everyone handles the situation differently, and like some kids are psyched and some are like freaking out, and if you start to take that on, that can be really detrimental, I think, both to you and to like the support that you can provide. And that's something that I've struggled with a lot because I'm like an overly empathetic person.
Yeah.
So I think just being able to like hold space and not make it about you is so important.
Yeah, and I think the word, I mean, I'm a fan of words in general, and the words hold space, you know, that phrase says a lot, and I think we take it the wrong way. I certainly have 100% in several instances. And I recently was called out in a really, really loving way by a friend whom I was trying to hold space for. But what I was doing was trying to fix or trying to direct the conversation in some way, you know.
Yeah.
And that's not holding space. You know, holding space is letting that person work through it in their time, you know. Even if it's not on the time schedule that you think they should be on, they're learning more by working through it because you're holding space. You're not trying to fix it necessarily, you know, and that's what I think that's what a lot of coaches mess up is, and me included, that we try to fix things instead of letting the athlete or the person work through it on their own in their own time.
Yeah.
It feels like a failure if we can't fix it sometimes. You know? And it feels like, oh, I'm a more effective, more successful coach if I provide a solution.
Yeah. That's so true. And then it does, like, when we come into those feelings, that is us making it about us and like about our self-worth as a coach. If we can't fix this for this person, then what does that say about us? And I don't think that's like the intentions that a lot of us go into it with.
Yeah.
But it happens nonetheless.
Yeah, totally. You know, we were talking yesterday at the Boulders, and you were talking about how different it is coaching remotely as opposed to in person with the kids. And I think that's one piece of advice I would offer to you, to anyone coaching remotely, is that because it's remote, because you're not there watching the process, there is a knee-jerk reaction to try to provide a solution.
Yeah.
And some clients want the solution, but the best thing most of the time is to not try to give a solution.
Yeah.
You know, and to let them work through it. And I think, honestly, remote coaching is set up really well for that kind of autonomy, you know, to let people struggle. The biggest mistake I see with people coaching in person is taking away the struggle. Yeah. You know,
totally.
Like, oh, no, put your foot there. You know, it's going to be way better if you do that. And that removes that struggle, that totally cuts off a learning opportunity for that person. And remote coaching, it's a little harder to cut off those moments.
That's so true.
They end up with more of those moments. So I think it's a positive, really. It's different, but I think it's a good thing, especially for adults who frankly need that autonomy. You know, kids take it upon themselves to have that autonomy a lot of the time. Adults often don't. You know, they're looking for solutions. We've been conditioned to want that.
Yeah.
So,
or like their lives are just so busy that they don't want to sit down and think about it.
Yeah.
And that's hard too, because it's like, well, my coaching style is very much like I communicate mostly in questions. I just thought of this really funny story. So it's maybe not going to come off that funny since you can't like see the video.
Just put air quotes and then
anyways.
then it'll come off funny to me. That's all that matters.
I missed practice one day. I think this was before all the COVID shutdowns and stuff. It was last year sometime. And the younger team that I coach, so all winter I usually have like a cup of tea in my hand. It's cold in the gym. And like I said, I communicate in questions a lot of the time. And one of my co-coaches took a video of one of the like 11-year-old kids. She like had a cup of tea in her hand and was like pretending to be me. So she's like, how does that make you feel? And I was like dying laughing watching this video, and I was like, that's hilarious. It was really validating. I was like, I'm glad that's how they see me. I'm just standing there with a cup of tea, like asking them how they feel about things.
That's great. I love it.
It was so funny.
No, that's perfect. And I think that's how it should be. You know, you've developed your style and it works. And I'm excited for more adults to find it and to
Thanks.
latch onto it. How can people work with you?
So I have a website called holisticclimber.com. Pretty easy to find. It's also linked.
You sure you don't want to make
Instagram.
it Complexer Climber?
Complexer Climber. Yeah, maybe it'll change. Who knows?
Are you sure?
Next year could be a different name, different logo with some puzzle pieces.
We're forming a whole plan here.
Yeah. So all the info's on there, where people can just reach out to me on Instagram too.
Okay, and I'll have links to find you in the show notes in your Pocket Supercomputers, so that people can reach out.
Yeah, excited.
Yeah, thanks for sitting down. I know when
Of course, thank you.
I know
for
I
the
kind of
opportunity.
sprung this on you, and
I know. I was like, I've been like sweating this whole time, freaking out.
that's because you're wearing the softest, warmest sweatshirt on the
Got my
planet.
Power Company sweatshirt on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's cool. I've been like listening to this podcast for years, and
Are you gonna listen to yourself on it?
oh God, I probably will, but
Good.
I'll probably hate every second of it. I was just freaking out. Like when you sent me the text and was like, maybe we can sit down and have a conversation. I was like, oh God.
Yeah, it's good.
I think I'm not used to like being asked for my professional opinion, I guess, in some ways, which is kind of weird.
Well, get used to it.
And I'm also like not used to just talking. I feel like I can present myself better in writing, or I've just had more practice at it, probably.
Yeah.
Is what it is. So
Well,
So
I'm
this
glad
is
you did.
intimidating and uncomfortable and awesome experience.
Good. That's what we do
I
here.
appreciate
We
it.
do uncomfortable here. That's my favorite place to be. So I appreciate you taking time out of your climbing,
Of course.
sitting down, having this chat.
It is an
So,
honor. I'm psyched.
yeah. And you're gonna listen back, and you're gonna be like, "Fuck, I'm so wise."
Or I'm going to be like, God, I can't believe I said that in that way. I should have said this instead.
Complexer.
That'll probably be like the perfectionist side of me coming out. Like, oh, I messed that up. Oh, well.
Yeah.
First try. I'll take it. This is my last attempt.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you.
One of the things that I really appreciate about Taylor and her approach is the authenticity of her experience that she brings to her coaching. She doesn't pretend to know everything. I think that's something we really have to look for in coaches. We can't know everything. We haven't had all the experiences. Being able to say, I don't know, or I'm just learning, or this is my first time, I'm figuring it out, is such an important part of being a good coach. Taylor's got that in spades. I saw it in Bozeman. I see it now with Holistic Climber. If Taylor's approach resonates with you, you can find her at holistic_climber on Instagram. You can find her at holisticclimber.com on the interwebs. Go check her out. As for us, I'm not going to overwhelm you with what we've got going on here. Instead, spend some time thinking about how this country got where it's at, what role you've played in it, and how we can make changes to make this a better, more equal place. So don't look for us, get off your Instagram, get off your Twitter, and scream like eagles.
Keep it real.